So these things that I had taken kind of for granted, like, oh, I'm learning what it means to be a man. Suddenly I've discovered there are thousands, potentially millions of men all over the world talking and thinking and writing about masculinity. You would never know if you turned on the news.
I'm Paul, founder of Manifesto. Core is our online mastermind network, and this video is recorded live during our weekly community meeting. If you like it, then subscribe and check out our website if you'd like to join the next community meeting held every Friday. So welcome, men, to another Friday meeting, and a big welcome to Will Spencer from the Renaissance of Men here to our Friday meeting.
Hi, Paul. Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, great to have you on board. So yeah, Will and I have had several conversations already. We have one video up on YouTube, and we've been having a lot of engaged things. We share a lot of things from our background in kind of a search for meaning in some ways, and then really landing in this current movement around men and masculinity, and using that as a lens for reinvigorating the culture, I guess. And I'm really excited to have this talk today because we've agreed to talk about the subject of purpose. And getting into that, and I think Will has a lot of good input to put on that as well. So I think, Will, if it's okay, I want to frame the discussion a little bit with what's happening here in Europe a little bit, because you're over in the US, and maybe have a bit of a more a bigger perspective. But I think a lot of the guys here have been impacted by the situation that we've seen Russia invade Ukraine, and it feels like there's kind of, I just spoke actually to my neighbor an hour ago, and he's like, we are at war right now. Like, Denmark's already sent down a whole lot of military hardware to Ukraine. So, we are in this war, and it is very much like West against Russia kind of thing. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is the state of men in Western Europe. And if we have if there's a backbone and a strength to actually stand and fight. Or one of the things that's becoming more and more clear to me is that there's actually a large portion of men who are standing kind of facing some kind of nihilism and meaninglessness, and there's no lack of purpose. And so when the big evil incarnates of Putin suddenly appears, then it's like, oh yeah, it's a very rich recruiting ground for sending young men off to go and kill each other on a war ground as well.
Sure.
And so I think that's why this topic of purpose is really important for us to be discussing right now, and understanding on a personal level for each man, how is it that I'm connecting to my sense of purpose and meaning and direction in my own life?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different directions that I can go with that. I don't know if you want me to comment on the situation in Eastern Europe specifically to give you my perspective on it, or if you'd rather that I talk about the notion of individual men and their purpose, because I can skip the political aspect, and I can just go straight to purpose and comment about it there, because I don't know what you prefer in this particular moment.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a relevant take on this Ukraine thing, then I think not to do a political analysis, but sure, how, I think as far as it's how are we responding to this at a very basic level, I think is important as well.
Yeah, so I sent a tweet a few days ago, and I said I look at the situation in Ukraine a bit like I look at sports. I don't particularly care who wins the Super Bowl. I'm not invested in it. But what I know is that the Super Bowl is not about a football game. So whatever is going on in Ukraine is not actually about a war between these two countries. It's about something else. And the reason that we know that is for the past 2 years, the thing that we've been sitting in, that we've been marinating in, has been COVID, which has not been about a disease at all. It's over now. This global pandemic that was supposed to kill millions of people didn't. And I think there's data coming out from the UK right now that says that something like less than 3% of people who were said to have died from COVID were actually died from COVID. The rest died with COVID, which is not the same thing. So the statistics have been lied about, exaggerated, deceived, and this is all published data. So there never was any there. So for the past 2 years, we've been living in a media-generated hysteria fear loop designed to scare us into our homes, scare us out of our freedoms, scare us out of our generational wealth, and essentially scare us into a surveillance prison. And I don't think that point is even arguable anymore. It's also been used to scare us to put unknown, untested substances into our bodies and the data is out on that now, which has these alleged injections, these inoculations, according to Pfizer's own data, has a 93% adverse reaction rate and a 3% fatality rate. That data came out yesterday. So we've been scared as men and women in a civilization into injecting these untested substances into our bloodstream. So that's been going on for the past 2 years. It hasn't been about a virus at all, at all. There's no there. It's called, in America, we call it a nothing burger. So that's what's been going on. So to me, the reason why I understand that the notion of tanks and bombs and planes being closer to you geographically is a bit more threatening than it is to me. But at the same time, if we've spent 2 years seeing that this disease was a nothing burger that the world was supposed to give up life for, well, what's the odds that this is going to be another nothing burger that we're also going to be asked to give up life for? And so the thing is, there's this great book called, it's by Dr. Mark McDonald. It's, I think it was called United States of Fear. And what he talks about in this book, and it came out before the crisis, let's say in Eastern Europe, it talks about how for the past several generations, single women have been manipulated through fear, constant threat of war, climate change, disease, starvation, poverty, all of it, that we have this rising divorce rate, more single women who are more easily manipulated by the media, by fear, hysteria loops. And so when COVID came around, it was this perfect opportunity to weaponize all these women's fears. So maybe you saw the Karen phenomenon. I don't know if you had something equivalent in Europe, but in America, we had what's called the Karen phenomenon, which is a white, middle-aged, upper middle-class woman who felt the need to police everyone's mask wearing and shame and shut everyone down. Maybe you called it Karen. Did you have something like that in Europe? Did you have like a Karen?
I've heard the term. I wasn't actually sure exactly what it was, but certainly there's been policing and neighborhood watch kind of, and reporting of other people, that kind of thing. Yeah, I haven't heard that term used as much in Europe, though. No.
Right, and that phenomenon, at least in America, was driven primarily by women. And this is also why nurses, flight attendants, and school teachers, and many low-level bureaucrats are also women. And so a lot of the fear hysteria has been driven through those as well. These are largely like single, middle-aged, upper middle-class white women who have been terrorized over successive generations. Now, that in itself is pretty terrible. However, what's actually worse about it is that hysteria fear loop is supposed to be stopped, checked, halted by strong, confident, grounded men. And the men we've all been around the world, basically, well, I would say probably in Western society. No, definitely around the world, actually. I don't know, for those men who don't know, I've been to 33 countries on all 6 inhabited continents, and I backpacked around the world for 4 years. So I've seen a bit of the world, not Scandinavia, but I've seen a bit of the world. So I think I can say that there's been a feminization of men around the world, but it's primarily affected Western men. The decline in testosterone rates, for example, kind of proves that there's been a war on testosterone in both men and women. So the hysteria loop was ginned up around this disease, people dropping dead in the streets and whatever in China that never actually came to pass. And, these women who don't have strong men, who aren't in strong relationships, and perhaps have some beliefs about men that they don't trust men anyway, decided to just take over society and shut everything down in this fear loop. And there were no men to check them and say, actually, no, we're not going to do that. And so you had the Karen phenomena that kind of ran rampant, and men just kind of laid down, many men just kind of laid down and kind of took it. Now, so the reason why that happened, there's lots of reasons why that happened. But because one of the big reasons why that happened is men didn't have anything higher than themselves to serve. If you have something higher than yourself as a man to serve, in the form of God and purpose, which I think are deeply linked, and we'll probably get into that, then the material concerns around you don't really matter as much. So for a man who's oriented towards his purpose and who has a purpose, nothing around him matters as much as accomplishing that. And for any men that have had a purpose before and know what that feels like, that you become, in a very good way, an unstoppable, almost unstoppable. I don't want to say machine, because there's a lot of heart to it, but you become almost unstoppable because your conscience has convicted you that you must do this thing. And it doesn't matter what anyone else around you is saying. A man on his purpose will And this can go good directions and also go bad directions depending on the man and his character. But a man on his purpose becomes almost unstoppable because he knows, in the sense that if he doesn't achieve his purpose, he'll lose his own life. I may not necessarily mean that literally. So when you have the perfect storm of this global media generated fear hysteria loop, a lot of single, isolated, terrified, terrorized women, and men that have nothing higher to serve than themselves, than their own, let's say, appetites and casual everyday interests, it's the perfect storm to, I guess you might say, collapse society by setting these two forces against each other. That's the environment that we find ourselves in now. So we just see that COVID amounted to nothing, and that we've all given up God knows how much to sacrifice so much in the name of whatever to do that. And so now we have this other crisis, and how are we going to respond to that crisis? Are we going, for me, I don't understand a reason why I should ever listen to anything that anyone on the TV says again about anything ever. Will, it's going to rain today. I heard it on the news. Hold on while I go check outside. So in order to push back on that firmly, we have to be healthy in all these different ways, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, which I think you would agree with. But we also need a purpose to orient that actually gives us something to do when we push back on what seems to be coming.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Thank you for that one. That was definitely a lot of power there, Will, and a lot of, even if people don't agree on all the little details of everything about the vaccine or something like that, I think there's some really
the data is
clear.
The data is there. Yeah. The data is there.
There's some very I mean, I don't want to talk about that. I think I think you got really to a clear kind of an issue really about this lack of a sense of direction, of standing on something solid. And so we're kind of just washed away. And then the media is definitely getting into, what one could call an hysterical, accelerated rate of just like pushing the next thing.
Yes.
So,
and this is not Ukraine is not the end of it. This will last as long as it's going to last. And then there will be something else, and who knows what it'll be. I'm voting for aliens, but we'll probably see that we will probably literally see that before the end of the decade. Yeah, shoot your TV and throw it out the window. But no,
aliens, so it will before the end of the decade. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, in terms of the hysteria loop, like my friends go through phases of freaking out about the supply chain, or cyber polygon, which is a worldwide cyber pandemic. That's how you know that COVID was like really successful, when they frame some sort of worldwide computer shutdown as a cyber pandemic. Like, that makes no sense at all, but these things have been talked about. And so I think we have good reason to expect them, because we are at war. It's just not in Ukraine.
So, Will, can you tell us a little bit about your story? Because you've been a man who's really gone on a search. You mentioned you've been backpacking around the whole world. We've both been to Burning Man and experiencing or exploring a lot of different kinds of communities and philosophies and ways. And you're definitely a man who seems to have a very clear idea of where he's heading and what he stands for today. Mm-hmm. So can you explain, tell us a little bit about the story of how that happened?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of it's a longer story, but I will condense the main beats of it. Mm-hmm. So I grew up, my parents were married as long as I was there. As soon as I left home, they got divorced, but my parents were married as long as I was there. But my dad was working all the time. He was a very busy, very successful real estate attorney, and so he wasn't around very much. And so for the most part, even though he provided a great life for me, he wasn't around. And so for the most part, I was raised by my mom. My mom was a narcissist, drug addict, alcoholic, and she used me essentially emotionally as a form of emotional support, which I'm sure that many of the men here can unfortunately relate to. The term that I've heard recently is by Jesse Lee Peterson. It's called the son husband, where the son takes on the burden of the weight of his mother's emotional needs, which is a form of abuse, because no boy is capable of bearing that emotional weight, and it causes damage to a boy, and as it did to me. And so, but me being the sensitive, emotionally fluent child that I was, as part of my character, I was kind of able to carry that and accepted it as my responsibility, let's say. So I left home, went to college, but I knew that something wasn't quite right. In 2001, I was introduced to the work of Carl Jung and the idea of depth psychology, which I thought was very interesting. The ability to work with symbols to understand dreams and understand my own inner life. And I discovered that I had always been told that what it meant to be a man sports and football and, pizza and beer, what my friend Cameron calls boomer masculinity. That was never my experience of being a man. I always had a very rich inner life. I liked emotional music. I liked to write poetry, and that wasn't me. So I thought for a while there was something that was wrong with me in some way. And certainly being bullied didn't help that either. But then when I discovered the work of Carl Jung, I realized that, like, wait a minute, my rich inner life has meaning and has value, and it has a unique expression as a man as well. And that was when I first started thinking about what it means to be a man. So fast forward to about 6 years from there, 2006, my mother, she ended her own life and left me to find her. There's a long story around that. So I found my mom's body, and that was actually intentional. So I had to, pick up the pieces from that. And I found that I was like a little wobbly after that, as you might imagine,
Yeah.
that sort of adult level trauma. And so that's when I discovered this therapeutic technique called EMDR, eye movement desensitization, and reprocessing, something like that. I'll talk about it separately, but that was my first real experience with depth psychology, like what it is to go in the depths of my own mind, past my consciousness, and into my deep subconscious and find what's in there. And that was a whole new world for me to discover, that my mind actually worked to depths that I wasn't aware of. And so I was able to heal from that adult emotional trauma, which I found was fascinating. It really opened my eyes to what was possible with the mind. In 2013, I discovered the Mankind Project, which many of you may have heard of. And I went on the New Warrior Training Adventure, and that was extremely powerful. That was the first time I put depth psychology together with being around other men and seeing the pain that the pain that men live in, the shame that they carry, the strength that they carry, and what it means to actually stand up together as men and recognize each other as men and be initiated with each other. And so my initiation was a major turning point in my life. Fast forward a couple of years, I was in weekly men's groups and saw a therapist. So I'd go back and forth between the men's group and the therapist for 2 years. If you've read the book Iron John, they talk about this process of bucketing to get the wild man out, if you remember that myth. So that was a big part of my bucketing. Very intentional work to dig into my own mind, because I realized that I had the ability to change my own life if I changed my own mind and heart. And I was successful in that. So after about 2 years, I was able to leave my entire life in San Francisco behind, break up with a very difficult relationship that I needed, but I shouldn't have, that wasn't a good relationship. Sell everything that I own and start traveling around the world. And I did that for 4 years, and went to a bunch of different countries. I didn't make it to Europe during that part of the trip, but I went through South America. I went through Asia, I went through Australia, New Zealand, spent 6 months in India, China, Mongolia. And then I basically ran out of steam, moved back to New Zealand to try and make things work with a woman. It didn't work there. And I moved back to the United States in February 2020, just before COVID hit. Like literally just before. I moved into this apartment the day the lockdowns hit Phoenix. Wow. And then I started writing because I had so much to say. And that's when I discovered that men actually valued my perspective and what I had to say. And out of that, I started the Renaissance of Men.
What a powerful story. Thank you, Will, for sharing that. And just it really blows you away hearing what people have been through, and so it definitely answers for me that question when I hear you speaking today, and feeling that kind of drive of wanting to do something. So that was the past. Then I'm curious about, if we're just getting a little bit more to know you, actually, is like what is the structure of your day and your week and your month and your year look like? What are your important kind of like structural things that you're doing in your life to keep things together right now and keep focused and to be driving, towards what it is that you're trying to achieve as a man?
I would say that the most important things in my life that keep me going, honestly, like I have my own private men's group, and those guys, they're my honor group. And there's a book by Brett McKay called What is Honor? Brett McKay started The Art of Manliness. And in this book, he talks about vertical honor and horizontal honor. And vertical honor obviously goes up and down. It's your relationship. It's your relationship with God. It's your relationship with your conscience. It's what you feel that you're personally responsible for, that no one can tell you otherwise, but in your heart and your gut and your mind that you are responsible for serving something higher, a higher ethic, a higher purpose for yourself and humanity. So that's vertical honor. And so obviously prayer, my faith life, is a big part of where I'm at right now. And we can talk about that separately. But in terms of keeping me aligned, I have my guys, and we all keep each other on the path. And we're a huge part of that, because I feel like in the things that I do, I'm responsible to them. I'm responsible to be a leader. I'm responsible for continuing to be the man that they see me as. And that is a great gift. That's a great gift. And they also give me the opportunity to show up. Like, so for example, one of my friends had a dream the other night. It's like the ultimate red pill dream for those of you who know like the rational male and that whole philosophy. It's basically like he had a dream that his wife went off to some girl's weekend, and this is his lovely wife. They have a kid together and everything, like maybe 6 months old, and she went off and found some other super like alpha dude and like decided to leave him. Like that was the dream, like pure red pill, straight up stuff. And so he left me some voice notes on Telegram asking me about it. And like he just really opened up about that. Like it was a really challenging thing, and I could tell how much it impacted him. And just gave me like the opportunity to kind of speak some life and speak some truth into him. And it was really meaningful for him. And he thanked me. And I said, no, dude, thank you. Like, thank you for giving me the chance to be myself and trusting me with that, because there's nothing more that I want to do than benefit the lives of men. So in that way, like my friends are just as much as a gift to me because they give me the opportunity to show up. So that's a big part of my day. I have a podcast called The Renaissance of Men. And that takes up a lot of my time as well, in a good way. Like my podcasts sometimes run up to 4 or 5. I had one that was almost 5 hours. Epic, incredible conversation. And so I do a lot of that. I do a lot of writing. I was up quite late last night finishing a piece for Chest Magazine. If you guys know Jack Donovan, it's his new project. I go to the gym. I like boxing. I drink filtered water, get a Berkey filter,
Let's go a little bit deeper with the first one you mentioned, actually, with the men's,
the gym,
the group. No, the group,
oh, okay.
the men's group, that your men's group, because
yeah,
that's what we do here at Manifesto on Core.
Yeah.
This is our weekly meeting of all the different groups that come together. Then we have all these individual groups that meet once a week, right? So maybe I'm curious to know, like, one of the things you said is like this ability to actually open up to each other, as to another man in private. You're the one who actually spoke to me, I think, a couple of weeks ago, which we've taken in here about, it's like, these things aren't supposed to be shared to the world, but this is something we do.
Turn off the camera.
But are there other things that you're doing in your men's group that are like decisions that you've made about, how to set up a structure, or what are the cultural or the, ways that you guys work together that you think have been very beneficial for a group of men to be actually using each other in a way, especially in these chaotic times that we're facing at the moment?
We're really lucky in that we're very we're very selective about the men that come in. They have to be vetted by a couple different people, and we've gotten really lucky to have a really high motivation, high IQ, high levels of absurd humor kind of group of guys. And so we hang together pretty well. And the guys who don't make it, naturally they've ended up self-selecting out. They stop participating. They don't hang out. They don't come around anymore. And because what we've got going on is so tight, if they don't feel like it's something that they want to participate in or be a part of, they just stop hanging out. And then we talk to them, like, hey, you still cool? And depending on how they reply, we just like, hey, you don't have to be here. It's okay. We just ask that if you're going to be in the group, you just participate. And so if you don't participate, you don't have to stay. You can leave with our blessing. And so that's what happens, is that guys who don't feel like they want to be part of what we've got going on, no hard feelings. Like, it's okay. It's totally okay. We're grateful for the good times. We did have one guy, God, dudes, you guys know this, guys make an absolute fuck up of their lives with women, like unreal the things that men do. And one guy, just recently just absolutely turned his life into spaghetti with this girl. It was just like, he was telling us what was going on, and like the depths of which, like, dude, there is no solution to this problem. You're screwed. You're like, there's I don't want to go into it, but we were trying to help him, and I think all he wanted to hear was just whatever his plan was. And one day he just like straight up and like, hey guys, I gotta go, thanks, bye. And I was like, guys, don't do that. Just don't do that. Like, don't, respect the room. And so I think what really makes it work for all of us is that we all have this mutual shared understanding. And I think humor is a big part of that, actually, that we all share a sense of humor, a sense of irony, a sense of absurdity. For example, today's Friday. We call Fridays Double Dick Hard Friday. And so that gives you a sense of kind of what goes on in the group. It's the day that we let out all the absurdity that we have bottled up. And so I think things like that really keep us aligned. And that feeds over into the rest of the week where we kind of get a sense, hey, someone isn't showing up or someone's been a bit quiet, let's check in on them. And so it's very free form in that way, but I think that's really unique to the group of guys that we don't have any structure built in. Now, that said, we do have our first group sort of a retreat, I guess, that we're doing just for these guys, and that's coming up in May. And so I'm thinking about what processes I would like to do, because I don't want it to just be a few days of hanging out. Like, that would be great, but I want to make sure that we all walk away stronger as a group. And so that needs to have some container building, that needs to have some intention setting, that needs to have some specific things to then fulfill the intention, which is really exciting for me because these guys are like my closest friends. I've met most of them in person, but a lot of them haven't met each other yet, just because I was on this big road trip this year. So, or last year. So it'll be really interesting to see, to figure out what kind of structure I want to put on that in order, and while still allowing, I guess, the organic nature of it to flow.
Now, we've been having a lot of conversations recently about the need for having standards and for holding on to these standards, and for there to be a person, or preferably multiple people, who are constantly vigilant, as we call it. We also use this word container. Container is kind of like the implicit and explicit rules and culture and the heritage of the group as well in some ways. As a group gets older, there's a kind of like something that a spirit of the group that develops and is bigger than any of the individual people, but we need to be vigilant about it all the time and holding a standard, because whatever we tolerate, that becomes the new standard of the group. And so if we start allowing meetings to go over time when we've agreed on a set time, or we set an agenda and then we just go off of like constantly onto like little side parts and we don't actually do what we set out to do, then it becomes that those are the two things that I see. It's like they're essential. Within that container, that anything can happen. But the agreed on kind of structure for the meeting that we're going to be holding now, that needs to be held on to. And we need to be able to, that needs to be non-negotiable as well. Because the moment we start allowing that to slip, then we turn into a women's circle. And, there's nothing wrong with being a women's circle sometimes, but that's not what we're agreed to do. We agreed to that we're a men's circle.
That's right. Yeah. Well, no, I really like what you said, the word heritage, because that's something that I think has really started to come into focus for at least my group, and probably a lot of men that, for the past couple of years, we've all been driven online and we've all found various communities to be a part of. I've been a part of now 3 successive online communities on Telegram, my own group being the third one. But some of those guys that are in my group, we've been together online for almost 2 years. And so obviously like one weekend together doing hard stuff in the forest creates more intense memories of bonding between men than 2 years online. But nonetheless, the 2 years online, we have a lot to show for it. And so our group really does have heritage. And that's actually really important. I'm glad that you highlighted that. I was struggling to find the word for it because I was talking about something similar with someone else. But yeah, that is really important to have standards. We do semi-regular like video calls where we just talk and kind of shoot the shit, we check in with each other, but we do all have to sort of set the standard and say like, no, these are the values that we hold to, and be as explicit about them as necessary if we feel like they're not obvious, because we are so selective about who we let in the first place, with men who we judge, who we either know personally or who we judge already have those values. So that coming in, they have values. It's less of a process of we're inviting men in and transforming with the values. We do allow, obviously, for some wiggle room. Like obviously, if a guy comes in and has stuff to learn that we all kind of take for granted, then yeah, there's always an opportunity. And, we certainly, like, I formed this group after having been in other larger groups and been a leading member in these other groups, and finding men, who just didn't want to learn. They didn't want to listen. And there was a lot of conflict that developed through that, where it's like, look, I don't care if you disagree with me. I just want you to listen to what I have to say. And when men literally would not listen, and gave them every chance, that was when we had to make the hard decisions to kick men out of the group, like forcibly remove them.
Yeah, we kind of work with the process whereby when a guy comes and visits a group, he's not automatically accepted into a group. Then what you have to do is we try and identify what is the next step that this man needs to take in order to grow as a human being, and what is the barrier that's holding him back from that. And then you give them homework and you say, well, you're actually going to get to work on exactly that thing. You try and give them something that will directly address that issue that's holding them back. because they normally know what it is, right? They know what the
Oh,
barrier
okay,
is,
okay.
right?
They
And then when
should.
they can show like, oh, we can actually see from week to week, like he doesn't have to solve everything in 1 week, but you want to see that there's some kind of progress, right?
Yes. Okay. So he determines what he needs, the step he needs to take, rather than like, we all talked about you and we decided that this is how you need to improve as a human being.
Yeah.
That could be very confronting in a way.
Yeah, some guys have no idea, right?
Oh,
And
okay.
that's tough. Like it's
Yes.
really tough to be faced with that. But I wonder if one of the biggest problems, now we got to this word heritage, right? And I feel like that is one of our biggest issues as a society and as men. It's been the rejection of the father, the glorification of the boy and the youth, and the wonder of the new exploration, and kind of also just stepping into chaos somehow, and also the some kind of weird understanding of what's happening with masculine and feminine in our society today. But I know you've gone back to the Renaissance. In some ways, I've gone back, like way back, even further past the Renaissance as well,
right,
as a source of inspiration from something far older than myself and far bigger than myself to lean onto. And I think that's happening while it's happening at a society level, it's also happening at an individual level as well.
Oh yeah. Well, so my brand, the Renaissance of Men, the reason why I chose that is because, as I mentioned, I discovered the first inklings of what it meant to be a man through Jungian psychology, and then from the Mankind Project, which is sort of part of an outgrowth of the mythopoetic men's movement, Robert Bly, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, those sort of archetypal approach. That was the beginning of my experience of what we might call men's work. But then in 2018, and I thought that's all there was to it.
Mm-hmm.
But then in 2018, I discovered the Manosphere, which doesn't do a lot of men's inner work, but it focuses a lot on men's outer lives. So fitness, finances, women, etc. That they're red pill kind of world. And so I realized, like, well, there's this men's inner workspace that's talking about this set of topics, sort of psychological, emotional, spiritual topics. And then you have this manosphere red pill world that's talking about these kind of outer issues of fitness and very mental, very cerebral, conceptual versus emotional, spiritual. I'm like, well, there are these two worlds. That's really interesting. And then I went and I explored the pickup world a little bit, like not by doing anything, because that's a different thing, but I investigated. I'm like, wait a minute, that. So I started being able to put the pieces together in time. And I was like, well, so wait, the mythopoetic men's movement was like the 80s and 90s. And then the pickup artist world was like the 90s and like the early 2000s. And the manosphere was like the 2010s. Like, well, where are things at now? Well, now men are talking about like family and faith and religion. And I started putting the pieces together. And like, this sounds like a process. This has been an evolutionary process. And I realized that that's exactly what had been going on. And not only is that what's been going on, it's been going on for 40 years. So these things that I had taken kind of for granted, like, oh, I'm learning what it means to be a man. Suddenly I've discovered there are thousands, potentially millions of men all over the world talking and thinking and writing about masculinity. You would never know if you turned on the news, but if you go entering into any of these worlds, Twitter accounts, YouTube channels, books after books. I can't even, if I were to read a book a day coming out about masculinity, I still couldn't keep up. And I've read a lot of books. Mm-hmm. Exactly. There's this massive international conversation brewing about masculinity, and it's been building for the past 40 years. And where it's finally landing is on family and faith, and of course finances and fitness, the F's, right? That's where it's really landing. I encapsulate it in the notion of sovereignty, returning kings, men coming back renewed. It's a renaissance, it's a rebirth. And we, all of us on this call right now, and all the men that we know, are the leading edge of a 40-year long process to redeem masculinity, to give rebirth to masculinity, that began in the 1980s with the mythopoetic men's movement, who I know that you guys are inspired by with your European men's gathering. A lot of those same kind of processes or inspired processes you embody. That whole process is culminating now, like right now. We are living in the actual renaissance of men. It's not just me saying like, oh, hey, I'm going to help you have a personal renaissance, though I do that. That is part of my coaching. That's part of what I do. But the Renaissance of Men is a much larger process that we're all on the leading edge of, and that is now happening worldwide and cannot be stopped. Like, I didn't start it. It was here long before I got here. In fact, I'm a beneficiary of it. My own personal transformation came about as a result of the Renaissance, and it's larger than the manosphere. The manosphere is like this online place where guys talk about stuff. that's like the latest stage of the Renaissance. It's progressing beyond the manosphere now to something else. It's just happening very slowly. And so the Renaissance of men as a brand is, you know, what I help men do, but it's also describes a 40-year process of giving rebirth to masculinity.
I think
which
that's a great high level perspective on what's happening. That's really, really valuable. So I think I'm going to have one more question. I'm going to actually ask up for any of the other guys. Put up your hand in the Zoom here if you have a question before we stop the recording. But what I'd like you to ask, actually, to say is, especially you mentioned these 3 Fs. It faith, family,
faith, fitness, finances, family.
4 Fs, yeah.
Faith, fitness, finances, family, and for sovereignty.
And for sovereignty. I'd especially, I think fitness, finances, that I think we're pretty clear on that. Sure. What do you see as the role of, I'm interested in faith and family, because I think that's what's kind of also coming in new when you spoke about the kind of red pill movement, right? And faith and family seems to be coming in now as well. Yeah, you use the word God a lot already on this talk as well. So how are you having those conversations?
Yeah, I guess. Well, so if you read the book The Game by Neil Strauss, which is about the pickup era, it's sort of to read like at the time, I'm sure it was, you know, entertaining, and now it's like kind of gross, you know, to watch this guy who's slept with like hundreds of women and was able to, you know, officially pair bond with none of them, and it actually acknowledges that he was completely unable to form meaningful relationships. You ultimately realize that all of the material pursuits of life, in terms of fitness and finances and sex and all that stuff, they don't actually make you a man in the way that having a family does. Now, I myself am not a father, so but I do happen to have a lot of very noble, very worthy fathers of like 4 or 5 kids in my men's groups, and so I listen to them talk all the time. And the thing that they say is completely different from what I heard growing up. So what I heard growing up and what I heard when I lived in San Francisco was that family was the death of a man. Oh, you give up your rock and roll lifestyle, you know, and you have to, oh, it's so expensive and children are a bother and all that stuff. Why would you have kids? The opposite is actually true. What's actually true is that with a good wife and family, you get turbocharged. Your responsibilities, you know, obviously go 10x, but your desire to meet those responsibilities for the people that you love most in the world hopefully go 11x. And so I think fatherhood is where a lot of men are landing, because they recognize there's no fulfillment to be found in the material world. Ultimately, that true fulfillment is found in love. Now, that's not to say you can't, you know, you should just go live in the forest or live on the streets. Obviously, like, you're not truly loving, you know, those around you if you're not providing at least an adequate lifestyle for them, or even prosperity, you know, prosperity, joy, growth, you know, freedom of time and enjoyment and lack of worry. You know, those things are really important. So finances are important, but family is ultimately, you know, the building block of society. There's a great book called The Household and the War for the Cosmos by C.R. Wiley, which takes a Christian perspective, a biblical Christian perspective on family and how important that is. But even that isn't enough, because if a man only serves his wife and only serves his family, he is still missing something. And we know this in our hearts. If we look around, because you can be completely squared away, you can have a great house and a great career and a great family and everything's fine. And yet there's still this realization that someday you will die. And there is something beyond that. And what is that? And how can I begin exploring what that means? What does mortality mean? What does it mean to live and die? And so for many men, that is, or someone around them dies, right? And for many men, that is the gateway into faith. Now, for me personally, I've always been a very faith-oriented man. I grew up Jewish. I was bar mitzvahed, Catholic high school, you know, Buddhist meditation retreats, Kumbh Festival in India, like you name it. I've explored all the world religions, and I finally landed in Christianity because that's where my search for truth took me. And I can speak at length about that. But I've always been very motivated by faith. And I think a lot of men are now trying to understand what's going on in the world from this position of like, well, they see things are going crazy on this side, and they're wondering if there's more to life than that from this side. And that's driving them in the direction of faith, which takes a man beyond himself, which binds him to something much larger than himself, makes him a larger story, and then informs his decisions in a very noble and very righteous way, which then feeds down and out into everything that he does. And so I think a lot of men are landing there, and I think it's a very, very natural and very exciting thing. And I don't know that you can actually be complete as a man without faith in something higher than yourself, because who are you going to serve, right?
Yeah.
You know,
I think so. I'm noticing the situation in Europe right now with Ukraine and Russia, like it's driving either towards exactly the process that you're talking about, or to something like nihilism / like, let's just go to war against Putin because he's like the ultimate evil incarnation or something like that, right? And
does anyone on this call think that? Can I speak?
It could be. I haven't asked everybody yet, but maybe we'll get to hear from them in the discussion.
Sure. I mean, I would just say that that perspective of nihilism, to me, and I mean this in as, I guess, gracious a way, to me is cowardice. It's cowardice. Nothing like, because what that says to me is that a man is afraid of actually investing in the world and getting his heart broken by losing or by failing. And I honor that, and I get that. We've all failed, we've all broken up, we've all had bad breakups, we've all been hurt, and I get that. But the world still commands us to live, and simply wishing for everything to be obliterated so we don't have the responsibility to live as men is fear of engaging with life. Good. And there can be many good legitimate reasons for that fear because of heartbreak in the past, but living in that state of nihilism, as a man, like, I just want to take that guy into the forest and put him through some initiatory procedures and see if, like, you still feel that way. Well, probably not.
Good. Yeah. So we're going to take one question before we stop the recording. So Anton's actually our resident military guy in the Swedish. He's a Swedish Reserve, previous in Air Force pilots training. Let's hear what you have to ask, Anton.
Regarding nihilism and everything here, I would say that I can be a guy that just pick my arms up and going straight to Ukraine, because that purpose is so easy to grasp on, especially when I'm sitting here. The sun is shining and everything is good. I know that war is a much worse place. Even be out in the forest is much worse. So with this question, the question I had is, Europe is now aligning. We are coming closer to each other than we ever been before. So I think this is going to be the new era of Europe. So I would like to ask, do you see a cultural split between America and Europe again?
Well, it's really hard to say what's going to happen in America, because America has been taken over. I'll just say it, by evil. Our election was outright stolen. It was outright stolen. It was outright fraudulent, period, non-negotiable. And most people looked the other way because they just wanted to get back to normal. Like, they're like, all right, you know what? Do what you got to do. Just let us go back to sleep after scary, bad Orange Man. That was the deal with the devil that most people made. They found that now the devil is coming to collect. And so what's going to happen with that in America is very unclear. As people are beginning to wake up to things are very fucking not going back to normal. Sorry, I'm speaking like I would to my American brothers. So what happens in America is going to be very unclear over the next few months, because there are some very, very dark forces that are in control of American institutions, which is a very dangerous place to be. They have no physical power. These are not people that I would worry about if they ganged up 10 on me on a fist fight, but institutional power is real. And so that's something that we're working with in America, is how to reclaim power over institutions. Now, that aside, what's going to happen between Europe and America? I mean, I've been to Europe, and I understand the divisions between the various European nations, and I understand that you all are dealing with some very serious cultural issues, particularly around immigration and how it's affected your various national cultures and how you all sort that out individually and together. I would just be concerned, why is Europe coming together? What purpose is it coming together? Because if you're coming together in opposition to something, that's different than coming together in unity. So saying, like, we are Europeans, this means something to us, we want to create something for ourselves as Europeans, that's a very different energy than saying we need to come together as Europeans and stop this threat.
Or go to war. That's basically,
or go to war. Yeah, to me, that,
go to war.
Exactly. So for me, the
same was happening before the First World War. Basically, all of Europe came together like, oh, now we're going to go to war, and everyone felt the war was right and we need to do this, right? And
yeah,
that's what I'm also seeing now. But as Anton says, like, it's so easy, and there's this need for the warrior in man in Europe, and it's been so far pushed down.
Yeah, I think, look, I've been to plenty of countries around the world, right? So when I was traveling in 2016 and 2017, everyone in America was talking about Russia, 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 right? Everyone else in the world was talking about China, 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 China all the time. My first day overseas, I was in Argentina. In Argentina, I was in Buenos Aires. I went to the waterfront in Buenos Aires, and there are all these big gleaming buildings that they had done some landfill. And my tour guide was like, all those buildings are empty. I'm like, why? He's like, oh, the Chinese built them and they're waiting for land prices to go up. On my last day traveling, I was in Nepal. I was taking a bus, from the Annapurna circuit back to Pokhara. And I was driving by all these new hydroelectric dams that were being built. All had Chinese signage outside because all the workers were Chinese. So these were gifts from the government of China to Nepal to help power their future. I was in the small island nation of Vanuatu. You've probably never heard of Vanuatu. It's near Fiji. It's 7 days sail from Fiji. China had gifted them with $150 million shipping port. I was in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's whole cellular network was rebuilt by China. China has bought the world, right? And owns the world now. And so to me, China, look, I don't know what's going on, who Putin is, but I think as a nationalist, I think he's defending his interests. The real worry is China. And that's what no one is paying attention to. So, I don't want to tell you what you should do with your time or who you should go fight or what you feel called to do. But it's very worrisome to me when a target is placed by the media on somebody and said, you need to hate this person. Because to me, if the media is telling me to look that way, I'm looking that way. Like, what am I not supposed to be looking at? And I think the real worry is China.
Good. Thanks. I think the real worry is the digitalization and the atomization of men,
it's not,
by us just focusing on the medium is the message, right? Marshall McLuhan's basic stuff. But we're going to stop the recording now and I want to say one thing. I
want to say one thing.
Okay,
just to make
sure you get the last word.
The Chinese people, mainland Chinese people, are lovely. They are the most lovely, warm, welcoming, friendly people in the world. I was surprised. Like there was never a moment in my life where I wished I had learned Chinese more because they were so desperate to talk to me and they were genuinely friendly. So I don't mean to say that it's the people of China that are the worry. The people of China suffer under the government of China as much as the people do. So I just want to make really clear that it's not about the Chinese people who, of all the people I've met in the world, are some of my favorites.